What's up, guys? It's Rick with the Digital Divide, and today I want to talk about PC gaming, specifically the games that I grew up playing as a kid that made me fall in love with PC gaming. Now, I also grew up playing consoles, so I certainly have a lot of love for consoles. I started with the 8-bit Nintendo and have played pretty much every console since then, with the exception of maybe the Atari Jaguar and a few other random ones. But my favorite way to game today is still PC primarily, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One example of that is playing games online. You can play games online on the PC for free, whereas on the consoles you have to subscribe to a service. You also have options for controllers. Say, for example, you like the Xbox controller better, or the PlayStation controller better, or any controller ever made for that matter. They're pretty much all compatible with the PC to some extent, so you have so many options. And of course, you can just use the standard mouse and keyboard setup, which I think is critical for shooters. Now, you can also opt to play on a monitor in a typical setup, or if you want to play on a big screen TV and get the console experience, you can do that as well, using Steam's Big Picture mode. With the release of NVIDIA's DLSS a few years back, you can now get significantly more performance in your PC games without sacrificing any visual fidelity. With the release of Steam's new mobile platform, you can even take your entire PC collection on the go. So ultimately why I love PC gaming is because you have an overwhelming number of options. You can customize your gaming experience exactly the way that you want to, whereas the consoles are a closed platform and your options are a little bit limited. So on the PC, for example, if I choose to prioritize frame rate, I can dial down some of the visual effects in the game that I'm comfortable with sacrificing to get that additional performance, and vice versa. It's a really diverse platform, and I just love the freedom that it affords me. But that's not the focus of the video today. I want to go over the games that made me fall in love with PC gaming, specifically as a child, and these games are going to age me quite a bit. Most of these are from the early 90s or late 90s, which I consider like the peak of PC gaming for me. So we're going to go over some of these now. I'm going to try to choose some of the So at number 1, we have Die by the Sword. This game, as soon as I saw the box art, I was like, this looks epic. It is a third-person, medieval-style fantasy action game. You're fighting the undead, you're fighting orcs and rats in your typical sci-fi fare. The camera is a little bit wonky, as is the combat, but there's just something endearing about it that I loved growing up. As you can see, again, from the box art, I was drawn in immediately. It's just so badass looking, and I picked this up as soon as I saw it. And I had a lot of fun with the game. And believe it or not, the game was popular enough to get a spiritual successor called Draconos, Cult of the Worm, on the Sega Dreamcast. I didn't like this nearly as much as the original game, but it's still a decent pickup if you have a Dreamcast. So the next game I want to talk about is Unreal. This is the first Unreal game developed by Epic Games. Now, Epic has gone on to primarily focus on their graphics engines, and as you can see from this game, especially at the time of its release, this was light years ahead of anything else that had come out before it visually. So that's why now, aside from Fortnite, their focus is making graphics engines that other developers can use to make their games. And as you can see from that intro, this game really excelled at visual storytelling and atmosphere. There was this overwhelming sense of dread. Every inch of an interaction was started with a bunch of tension and then it's slowly revealed to you. Again, the visuals helped. The lighting on this game was next level. The textures were on a whole nother level. I remember this is the first game I ever played where you could walk right up to a wall and it had micro textures. I believe this is the first time that ever happened. I was super impressed as a kid, and this game actually holds up surprisingly well even to this day.
The once mighty army of Azeroth lay among the blackened and charred remains of Stormwind Keep. Those that escaped fled across the Great Sea, bringing tales of the suffering they had faced at the hands of the Orcish hordes.
So the next game I want to talk about is Warcraft II. This is the game that got me obsessed with Warcraft. I've played every game in the franchise since, and I collect all the books as well. I read all those. This is just an unbelievably fun game. I remember it was one of the first games that I played online quite a bit with my friend through dial-up. We would play each other online. This was one of the first games that got me into that. I put in hundreds of hours into this game, and even more into the sequel, Warcraft III. I've got at least over 1,000 hours in that game, and I really love the franchise. I love strategy games in general, so this one was a huge one for me when I was a kid. So the next game I want to talk about is Need for Speed 2, specifically Need for Speed 2 SE, which is the special edition. I really like the soundtrack to this game. Visually, it doesn't hold up particularly well. As I was revisiting this footage, I was like, man, these car models look horrendous. But back in the day, this game was a lot of fun, and I put in dozens and dozens of hours into it with my friends online, so it was really fun. So the next game I want to talk about is Alien vs. Predator. This is the 1999 release developed by Rebellion Studios, and this game was unique in that it let you play as all three. You could play as the Alien, the Predator, and the Marines, and each one had their own distinct campaign with wildly different atmospheres. For example, if you're playing as the Predator, you're just like this powerhouse. You just pile drive through everything in your way. If you're playing as the Marine, it's kind of almost a horror game because it's terrifying because you're the least powerful of the three species, so you're basically just trying to survive. Whereas the Alien is more stealth-based. The Alien was my personal favorite to play. That character was incredibly powerful, but also took a lot of damage if you were to get shot, so you could climb up on top of walls and sneak up on people. It was just so much fun. Here we're taking a look at some Predator gameplay, and again, he was a little bit OP because he could cloak himself, and a lot of his weapons were like one-shot kills. But man, I can't tell you how many hours I put into this game as a kid. Me and my friends played this quite a bit. This was like a benchmark game for me growing up.
A land of innocence has no need for gods, until fate intervenes.
Keep away from the water!
Stop!
When people pray, a god is always born.
Help! Someone help us!
Child!
We call to the heavens!
Able to change eternity. That God is you.
So the next game I want to talk about is Black and White. So this is a game developed by Peter Molyneux of Fable fame, and this is a strategy god simulator where you are in control of a village. You have to keep your deities happy, and you have an avatar. You can control like these big giant beasts, which you'll see here in a minute, and they serve as your avatar that you can use to keep your subjects in line and help defend against other gods that try to invade on your city. This is just a really fun game growing up. It had some amazing music. The visuals don't hold up particularly well these days, but I really enjoyed this one, and I put a ton of time into this as well as the sequel that came out a few years afterwards. This was also one of the first games I can remember that had that dynamic of good versus evil. So you could be a good god, or you could be a straight up evil god and torture your disciples. You had the choice. Other games would later follow that. Mass Effect is a good example. Knights of the Old Republic. But this is the first game I remember that had meaningful consequences to your actions.
Look at them. Just look at them. These are miraculous creatures indeed.
They certainly are, but not quite as big as I expected.
Not.
Look at you, hacker. A pathetic creature of meat and bone, panting and sweating as you run through my corridors. How can you challenge a perfect, immortal machine?
The next game I want to talk about is System Shock 2. This game is terrifying. Well, at least it was when I was a kid. It is absolutely drenched in atmosphere and dread. You're stuck in a space station, and everyone around you is kind of taken over. Think of the Borg from Star Trek, like a mix of Borgs and zombies. The AI on the ship is trying to kill you or take control of your actions. And this was one of the first-person perspective games that I can remember that had a heavy emphasis on RPG mechanics. So later games like Morrowind and Skyrim, where you could walk into a room and interact with everything and pick up every object, would become the norm. But this was the first game that I remember that heavily included or incorporated that level of interactivity. So it wasn't just a first-person shooter. There was a lot of exploration, and again, it was terrifying. This was a straight-up horror game. And spiritually, BioShock would follow System Shock and become kind of a spiritual successor to a certain extent. So the next game I want to talk about is Heretic 2. Now, this game I absolutely loved as a kid. It was just such a fun, grand sci-fi adventure game. And it's odd because the original was a Doom clone. It was part of Heretic, Hexen, Doom, Duke Nukem 3D. When all of those games came out, this was originally a very, very different kind of game, and the developers wanted to differentiate themselves from the rest of those games with the sequel by turning it into a third-person 3D action-adventure game. You could get different armor, and that would actually show up on your character in the game. You could get elemental attributes added to your weapons, like fire and ice, and it was just a lot of fun. It felt like a big, grand adventure that was beyond the scope of anything that I had played at that time.
has begun.
So the next game I want to talk about is called Sacrifice. This is a unique game. It is a real-time strategy game, but it takes place entirely from the third perspective. It features a lot of spell casting and resurrection. You control minions, and you're tasked with like protecting certain structures and taking over bases to win the map. It's a really strategic and fun game. It struck me as a kid because visually it looks so different than anything that I had seen at the time. It's super colorful and has a really abstract look to everything, and just really weird voice acting, but I liked it quite a bit. So last but not least is Thief the Dark Project. This is one of my top 10 games of all time. I don't traditionally like stealth games, but man, this one, at the time that it came out, there was nothing like it. You had different kinds of arrows so that you could shoot out lights with water arrows. You had arrows that could shoot powder on the ground so that nobody could hear your footsteps. It starts off as a traditional medieval stealth action game where you're sneaking around castles, stealing gold and treasure, and then later on, it turns into something completely different, to the point where you're literally helping ghosts find objects from when they were alive to help them rest in peace in the afterlife. And then it gets to the point where you're fighting like the undead and there's literal zombies. It's just, it goes all over the place, and it is drenched with atmosphere. It is so good. The music is amazing, but minimalistic, because you're meant to hear. The sound design in this game is everything. You could hear their footsteps so that you could tell how far away they were. It's just, sound design on this was a whole nother level, and the voice acting was pretty good too.
Thank thee for getting that book for me.
So that's going to do it for me today, guys. As always, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments below what games you played as a kid. There are so many of these that I can't possibly cover them in one video, but I do plan to release more because I have a whole list of these from my childhood that I want to go over at some point.